Ashley Joyner. Hello, Ashley. How are you?
Hello, thank you for having me.
Oh,
Yeah, I'm good.
I'm happy that you're
Thank you.
here. So you're in Great Britain right now?
We're in sunny London for a change.
For a change, that's true. So tell me, have you ever been to Poland? Just being curious.
I have not been to Poland. No, I was quite sad that lockdown meant that I couldn't come and visit you all for the screenings. But hopefully we'll make a visit another time.
Hopefully.
Yeah, soon.
So let me just start by asking you a question from a song. I don't know if that's okay for you.
Sure.
I had a small song one day. What have you done today to make you feel proud?
Today, nothing too specific, I have to say. There are ups and downs during lockdown. Some days I'm certainly more proud than others. But it is only morning here, so maybe that'll change. But I'm very happy to be here with you. And hopefully, I'm sure our discussion will be great and we can incite some pride anyway.
That's a great idea. Let's do that. I've watched your movie today again in the morning to prepare for this interview, but also to remind myself every detail that I could. But what struck me the most, I think, is that young people are not usually interested in history or herstory or whatever you want to call it. What made you get interested in that issue? Because your movie is a documentary, but it's a history one. So what made you start being interested in history of LGBT movement in Great Britain? Yeah.
Sure. So personal backstory. I was dating someone whose mum was a lesbian, and she asked me if I was going to Pride, and this was probably maybe like 5 or 6 years ago now. And I said, no, I'm not going to Pride. I don't like Pride. I don't want to go. And she rightly said to me, you don't know your history. And so just to kind of appease my then mother-in-law, I went and did some personal history, like research. And it was really just for myself, really. I didn't have any intention of making a film about it. And then the more I started reading, the more I realized how little I really knew. And what struck me in particular was a piece of legislation called Section 28. And Section 28 is very similar to the laws that are being imposed in Poland now. It prevented the discussion of homosexuality, LGBT.
Promotion of homosexuality.
Exactly, the promotion of it, the promotion of pretend family relations. Yeah. So very similar to what you're experiencing now. But I experienced that as a child and didn't know about it. So even as a child, I was being oppressed in schools and things like that. Teachers that probably knew I was gay and wanted, those that were supportive and probably would want to say something were actually not allowed to, for risk of losing their job. And so that's what really motivated me to make the film, was that piece of legislation. And then from there it just spiraled, and then we started discovering other things. And the thing with history, I have a problem with that word a little bit, because it often feels like it's something of the past. And actually what I've tried to show in the film is that actually these things aren't in the past, and they are still having knock-on effects now. So for ourselves here in the UK, Section 28 is no longer in place, but we're still dealing with the mental health consequences of Section 28. We have a whole generation of LGBT people that grew up feeling not very great about themselves. But also the global knock-on effects of Section 28. We're seeing it in Poland now, we're seeing it in Russia, we're seeing it in Egypt. It's not history, it's still very much a part of today.
Well, even in UK, the law was actually repealed in 2003, if I'm correct.
Yeah, very recent.
Yeah. So very recent. Yeah. Again, so because sometimes when we look, especially from Polish perspective, to other countries in the West, we always think, oh, they have been so equal for so many decades and hundreds of years, which is actually not true. When you read about that or learn about that, you know that it's kind of a recent development for those countries.
I was still in school, and actually something like Section 28 the real threat of Section 28 was self-censorship. So what you found was, even though the legislation had changed, teachers or people were still censoring themselves. And so, yes, it changed in 2003, but it's taken a long time to actually get over that. And I still don't think we're over it. You know, even the protests against LGBT education are still happening. You know, we don't have LGBT education, even if Section 28 is over. So it's still very much a current issue.
That's interesting what you said about other countries kind of looking up to Section 28 and creating similar laws. For example, in Poland. And again, the idea is very similar. It doesn't prevent you from doing things in a specific way, but you have always in the back of your head that there is a law that prevents you from something, and that means that you're a citizen of second category or whatever.
Yeah, I don't know if it's the same in Poland. From what I've read, it feels very similar. Especially, I think you call it the family charter.
Yeah.
Something. Yeah. But that the fact that the government is able to define what family is. And I think the reason the response in the UK was so strong was because even those people that aren't LGBT, they got on board with the cause, because they realised, well, if the government can start defining who are family and who are not, that's incredibly dangerous. And that does affect people that are non-LGBT as well as LGBT. Yeah.
So you think that was the thing that started the activism against the Section 28? Because I was wondering about what makes people go into activism, start doing activism, and from what you just said is that the government being going too deep into what is your family, what is not the family. So do you think that was the reason, that was the idea?
I think it was one of them. I think you also have to look at when Section 28 came into place, and it was on the back of the HIV crisis. So you had a community that was already incredibly weak or weakened, and was also very angry. And so then on top of that, you're now trying to say that, and during the AIDS crisis, the gay community in particular were very dependent on the rest of the LGBT community. We really had to look after ourselves, and it really was like a family. And so then you have Section 28 come in and say, this is a pretend family. And it's kind of like, well, how dare you? You know, we're here looking out for each other. We're nursing each other. We're, you know, burying our family on a daily basis. And now you're trying to say that this is not family. So the timing is very important in relation to Section 28. But yes, in terms of other people getting on board, it really was about, well, you're not just threatening one community, this is actually an issue for all of us. And I think the family charter, from what I've read, is probably very similar. You know, it may be publicized as an LGBT agenda or anti-LGBT agenda, but actually it affects everybody.
Of course it does. Of course it does. Especially that it defines family in Poland as a marriage in Poland between men and women, and family as the one created by those. So it not only affects LGBT people, but also single parents, also divorced people, etc., etc. So in a way, it affects almost everyone, because we both know how little of those so-called normal families there are right now in the world, and the world is changing. But I was wondering, you made the movie, you've created the movie. Are you an activist?
Yeah, so the film started at the same time that I started getting involved in politics and activism. So it was very much a self-discovery project that got built along the way. And a lot of the people that are in the film are people that I met during that exploration. So I was very overwhelmed at the beginning. I was working with, you know, groups like ACT UP or Positive UK, mostly HIV charity activism groups and charities. And I made the film for somebody that is probably just getting involved for the first time, for those, when you're stepping into activism for the first time or politics, it can be very overwhelming, and you're usually surrounded by people that know all of the jargon or can understand the connections between this, and this. And you kind of just sit there kind of just like, wow, how do I get involved in this? It can be very daunting. And so the film covers a huge spectrum of LGBT history and LGBT politics, kind of as stepping stones into little areas. And I hope what it will do is give somebody enough information that they can then, something triggers them in one particular thing or interests them, that they can then go and explore that deeper. It could be education, it could be healthcare, it could be workers' rights, just so that someone's kind of equipped with a general knowledge that they can go and explore deeper.
I do have to say that I envy British LGBT people for having a film about their history. We don't have that one in Poland yet. Let's say yet. But what was very intriguing for me is the way that the movement in Great Britain kind of squished politicians between two different waves of activism. So between Stonewall, which is a fantastic organization, I've worked with them many times, and Outrage, which is kind of a different one. I never worked with them. They are doing fantastic work, of course, but I didn't have a chance. So can you tell me more about that? Because that's very interesting, and that's a strategically very good idea.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so what happened with Outrage and Stonewall was this kind of pincer movement. So you had these people, you had Outrage on one side that would call it causing chaos, really, and really making a lot of noise and a lot of demands and really being on the street and kind of like, it was radical action.
Yeah.
They were taking action. And then Stonewall were more legislative. So they were, more about working with politicians and pushing for legislative change. Two very different, methods. But what that did was it forced politicians to either work with one or the other. And it's a back and forth. And I think actually, throughout our history in the UK, there's always been that back and forth movement and that pincer movement. And I think we're seeing a very similar thing now with Black Lives Matter, in that there's a lot of action being taken on the streets, whether that be through protests or statues being knocked over or, whatever it is. And then there will be people that come up behind with kind of legislative change, pushing for legislative change. But I think you need that direct action to begin with, to really push the boundary as far as it possibly can go, because it will naturally push back. Yeah. And that's where the legislative change comes in. And then the direct action pushes again, and then it's backed up with legislative change. So it's this back and forth, but hopefully always making progress.
I was also wondering, actually admiring something that's going on within the LGBT movement in the UK, is that you're talking a lot about intersectionality, and this is something that it's just we've been talking about that among activists in Poland for sure for many years now. But when it comes to regular LGBT people that are not activists, not interested in politics, this issue does not even exist. They do not think about that or even know about that. And I kind of understand that, since we're on a fight for our survival right now. I mean, we're trying to stay alive. So obviously there are maybe some more urgent issues or things to think about. But I really enjoy that you're very cautious about that issues. Could you maybe tell me a bit more about how that happened? How all those intersectional issues merged into LGBT movement?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it's always been a part of the LGBT movement. Especially in the West, for instance, in America and in the UK in particular. At the very formation of the Gay Liberation Front, which was probably one of the first direct action groups for gay people. There were other groups before, but they weren't about direct action. So Gay Liberation Front were. They really were brought into the revolutionary ranks by the Black Panthers for the civil rights movement in the US. Huey P. Newton understood that the oppression of one person is the oppression of all people, and that until everyone's free, nobody's free. And so in 1970, Huey P. Newton brought the Gay Liberation Front and the Women's Liberation into the revolutionary ranks by inviting them to the Black Panther, the Philadelphia People's Conference, which was run by the Black Panthers. And so I think at the heart of the LGBT movement, or at least at the beginning anyway, it was very much about our oppression is very much tied to one another, and we have to fight for one another. And I think that got lost, that sentiment got lost along the way. And I think people are starting, well, some people have always been doing this, but I think there's certainly a new energy around connecting those issues and fighting for one another. And that's very necessary. So I think we'll be seeing a lot more of that. We're certainly seeing it now already in the UK, where there's huge amounts of racism within the LGBT community. There's a lot of misogyny and transphobia. And so we're at a point now where we're being challenged by those things, and we're having to confront them and actually start working together again.
There's no Pride Parade this year in London. There is no one in Warsaw as well, unfortunately. But I was wondering what do you think about the idea? Because some people tend to say that pride parades are not definitely the most efficient way to fight for our rights, not the best way to inform about our issues. And on the one hand, I do understand that they, in Poland, sometimes people say that this is a concept kind of implemented from the Western countries, kind of, you just implement it. But on the other hand, I know that there are some tensions when it comes to Pride in London as well, about how it looks, who is taking part, etc., etc. So maybe we don't need marches or parades. What do you think about that?
Well, I think it's very dependent on where you are in the world. Pride in London is a very different thing to Pride in Warsaw, for instance, or Pride in Kenya or Uganda or Russia, Chechnya. They're very different things. And I think when we're talking about activism, it has to be tailored to the area that we're in, or in response to the challenges that we're facing. Pride in London has its faults, which are raised in the film. Some of them anyway, and they are being challenged on them. But Pride in London does a particular thing that isn't, at this stage probably isn't necessarily activism in the way that it was in the 1970s, where there were police barrages and stuff like that. But what it does do, I think, is send a beacon of hope, potentially, to other countries who don't have that privilege or that lack of safety, that sense of safety and things like that. But then Pride in London is a very different thing to like a small pride in a local area in, I don't know, Yorkshire, where it's just like a small village, and all of a sudden you've got this LGBTQ presence, So I think pride parades or marches have a place in our activism, but I think it's dependent on where you are. But there's certainly issues with our pride parade here.
It's COVID-19 year this year, so we have to admit that. So unfortunately, so what can one do to celebrate Pride during the lockdown? What are you going to do to celebrate Pride, and do you have ideas for other people to do so?
Yeah, I think COVID is. I think one of the things that we have to address with COVID is that all of a sudden a lot of LGBT people are now forced into hostile situations, whether that be at home with homophobic parents or unstable living conditions, lack of, connection with their LGBT family. That's one thing that we really have to address, and seek ways of supporting those people that need it most, who are in vulnerable positions. I think the other thing is, we don't necessarily need to be on a pride parade to show our pride. There are lots of other things that can be done from home, whether that's, supporting the work of a charity that are doing work elsewhere, promoting their work, also taking this time to actually read and understand our own oppression.
And watch some good documentary movies as well.
Yeah, watch some good documentaries. But also not just about LGBT, but about other movements. And this is a time for us to actually step back out of our usual day-to-day lives and explore. I think that's really important. But I think supporting those organizations that are on the ground, or supporting people on the ground, is really great. This is an opportunity to do that. Whatever your bar tab is that you would spend at Pride normally, maybe you can just donate that money elsewhere if you're able to. That's just one thing. But I think equipping yourself with knowledge is probably one of the best things we can do at this stage, so that when lockdown is eased, we know how we're going to, or what we need to tackle and how we can tackle it.
That's the great message, actually. So right now I just want to ask you to just invite everyone to your documentary, and just let everyone know what they are going to see in a few minutes, in a few seconds.
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you for being here and for watching the film. This film was very much a self-exploration for me, and I learned a lot along the way. I hope that even though it's very UK-based, you can see how it's linked to the situation in Warsaw and Poland in general. I hope you take inspiration from the fact that we have always been here as LGBTQ people. We have always fought for each other, and we will continue to do so now and when lockdown's over.
I think that was the best introduction possible, so thank you very much. Ashley Joyner, ladies and gentlemen, and others, was my guest, and thank you for your time, and thank you for being here.
Thank you very much.
See you.
Happy Pride.
Happy Pride.